I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 29 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Yes. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, subsection 2, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 12, 2026, the committee is meeting on Syria's political transition. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These are measures in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of everyone, particularly including our interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which will link to a short awareness video. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can select the appropriate channel for interpretation, either Floor, English, or French. And for those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. Joining us from the International Crisis Group, Noah Bonzi, Senior Advisor for Syria, joining us by video conference. From the People's Democratic Party of Turkey, Hizyar Ozsoy, former Deputy Chair and Member of Parliament, joining us by video conference. And from the Syrian Women's Political Movement, Muzna Dureid, co-founder, also joining us by video conference. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed to rounds of questions from members. I now invite Mr. Bonzi to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Thank you for having me today. It's an honor to join you all. 16 months in, Syria's transition is going better than could reasonably have been expected, given the extremely difficult circumstances in which it is taking place. But there have been tremendous. Achieving durable stability will require further course adjustments by the country's new leadership and increased support from the international community. First, the good news. Syria's people and new leadership have to a great extent managed to hold their country together. That's no small feat, given what they have lived through. Over 14 years of civil war, hundreds of thousands of Syrians were killed, and more than 13 million were displaced. That's more than half the country's pre-war population, and includes some 6 million who became refugees outside the country. The former Assad regime ruled and fought with extreme brutality, and it deliberately exploited fault lines between communities in this diverse country. Extremists among rebel ranks did too, contributing to a vicious cycle of polarization and radicalization on both sides of the conflict. In late 2024, as opposition forces advanced and the Assad regime collapsed, many wondered if the country would fragment or plunge into new cycles of civil war. That hasn't happened, thanks to the incredible resilience of Syria's people and commendable, albeit incomplete, steps by Syria's new leadership to steer toward reconciliation rather than vengeance. I'll speak in a moment to challenges and shortcomings, but it's worth underlining that Syria's abrupt shift from horrific, seemingly intractable civil war to a post-war transition is itself a massive collective accomplishment. And as a result, Syrians are beginning to return home. Some 1.5 million have traveled back to Syria from abroad, and another 1.8 million Syrians displaced within the country have returned to their homes. The new leadership's success thus far in building international credibility has been a key factor generating positive momentum and mitigating concerns about their jihadist roots. The pragmatic foreign policy pursued by President Ahmed al-Shara and Foreign Minister Assad al-Shaybani has notched some critical wins: sanctions relief from the US, Canada, and other Western countries, removal of terrorist designations previously imposed by the UN Security Council, and forging of broad diverse network of constructive diplomatic relations, including key support from Western countries in the Gulf, while reducing tensions with Russia and China. These successes have helped stabilize the transitional government, even as it struggles with limited bandwidth and insufficient diversity, a point I'll address further in a moment. But there have also been deeply painful failures, particularly during the first 8 months of the transition. More than 1,300 people, mostly Alawites, were killed in March 2025 when government forces, responding to insurgent attacks, committed massacres against civilians.
Évidemment, il y a un point d'ordre, Monsieur le Président.
A point of order, please, Mr. Chair. I think that we do need to keep in mind the health and security of our interpreters, and very unfortunately, we might need to reevaluate the
implicated
we will suspend the meeting for a
4
few
months
minutes.
later against Druze civilians in the southern parts of Iraq. Violence that killed some people.
Yeah. Mr. Bosny, just to resolve these technical challenges, we will suspend for a few minutes to allow the technicians to fix the problem, because we're having lags with respect to presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. So while the discipline and behavior of government forces have improved in subsequent months, it will take more than that to rebuild trust with many Syrians, particularly in minority communities. Meanwhile, Syrians' humanitarian needs remain immense, and the international bandwidth for addressing them is diminishing. The UN estimates that more than 15 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian support, and the current regional war has exacerbated the challenge. Gulf states whom Syria was relying upon to support and invest will now need to prioritize their own resilience. Looking ahead, finding ways to compensate for that expected shortfall must be an immediate priority for Damascus and its supporters in the international community. In conclusion, I'll briefly note a couple additional points which I'm happy to address further in discussion. First, the Syrian government took a bold step by participating in US-mediated talks with Israel, which have stalled amid Israel's refusal to commit to withdrawing from Syrian territory it has occupied since the fall of the Assad regime. In order to reduce risk of escalation and to open a pathway to reintegrating Suwayda within the Syrian state, it is important that Damascus remain committed to this track and that the US continue to press Israel to engage constructively. Second, the integration agreement between Damascus and the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces ended weeks of clashes, averted what could have been an ugly fight in Kurdish areas, and charted a pathway for inclusive local governance in the country's northeast. Both parties showed wisdom in reaching it and goodwill in implementing it thus far. If they continue that, it will serve as a major step forward for the country as a whole. Finally, nationwide, it is also crucial that Syria move quickly to improve the inclusiveness of government structures at all levels, from local security forces to the cabinet. The government's performance and credibility will improve if it better incorporates Syria's rich diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I now invite Mr. Hisyar Ozosoy to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having me today. I will actually start where the previous speaker ended, the question of minorities. We think the approach of Canada and the broader international community to Syria should be guided by a clear lesson from recent developments. Unfortunately, we have observed that over the last year, Whenever international legitimacy has been granted to the current leadership in Damascus, it has been used not to build inclusive governance, but to centralize power and repress communities. The United States and some European partners are pursuing, together with Turkey, Qatar, and the Saudis, short-term stability through centralization, supporting a strong center in Damascus in the hope of restoring order. In practice, however, centralization has produced a lot of repression. Kurdish regions remain under pressure. Alawite civilians have faced mass violence without accountability. Druze communities have suffered grave abuses. And the new Syrian authorities have already killed thousands of their own citizens, just like Assad was doing it before. This approach may reduce fragmentation in the short term, I mean centralization, but it is also sowing the seeds of future conflict. The agreement between the Kurds and Damascus, signed on January 30th, illustrates these risks. The agreement lacks international guarantees, monitoring and enforcement mechanisms, and binding protections for autonomy and political inclusion. At the same time, U.S. policy has moved toward closer alignment with Ahmed al-Shara, encouraging integration into a centralized system without sufficient safeguards. This has deepened the perception that pluralist actors are being sidelined in Syria. We think Canada should adopt a different premise, which is the inclusion of minorities is not only a matter of principle, it is a structural requirement for sustainable stability. Kurds, Druze, Alawites, Christians, and secular Arabs, and particularly women, are not simply communities to be protected. They are essential political actors who can serve as a counterweight within the system. Their meaningful inclusion can check authoritarian centralism, limit the dominance of any single ideological force, in this case Islamism, and restrain Islamist and fundamentalist tendencies. Without such balance, power will concentrate and repression will follow. This is why decentralization is essential. A decentralized system would provide real autonomy and protection for vulnerable communities, reduce zero-sum struggles over control of Damascus, institutionalize power sharing across regions and communities, and create checks against authoritarian domination. Decentralization is not fragmentation, it is not separatism, it is a framework that allows diversity to function as a stabilizing force. We believe and strongly suggest that international legitimacy, reconstruction support, and normalization with Syria must be conditional. They should depend on democratic governance, decentralization of power, inclusion of minorities and secular actors, and accountability for abuses. Without these conditions, external support to the new regime in Syria will only reinforce the very dynamics that destabilize Syria. Canada is well placed to help rebalance Western policy. Working with European partners, particularly the UK and France, Canada can promote a more sustainable approach, one that recognizes that stability comes not from concentrating power, but from distributing it in a way that creates balance and restraint. In that context, we recommend that both Canada and the broader international community should condition all of their engagement with Syria on democratic and decentralized governance, advocate for international guarantees and monitoring mechanisms, especially for the implementation of the agreement with the Kurds, reject unconditional legitimacy for Damascus, support inclusive negotiations involving all major communities, and promote decentralization as the core constitutional framework for stability. Let me conclude by re-emphasizing that granting legitimacy to the new regime in Syria without conditions enables centralization and repression and ultimately fuels instability. Stability in Syria, to repeat, will not come from concentrating power in Damascus. It will come from building a system in which diverse communities act as a counterweight, keeping authoritarian and fundamentalist tendencies in check. And finally, I urge Canadian policymakers to help make that balance possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I now invite Ms. Muzna Durey to make her opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, honorable members of the committee, merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and honourable members of the committee for having invited me to appear before you today.
I'm a Syrian Canadian woman, a mother, and a former refugee. I grew up in Al-Qadam in Damascus, a neighborhood that was systematically wiped out by the Assad regime and its allies. My family endured 5 years of siege, bombardment, and mass killing, and forced detention and displacement. I arrived in Canada in 2016 as an asylum seeker, young, alone, without a plan, seeking only safety and the chance to reunite with my family. I rebuilt my life in Canada from scratch while continuing to advocate for Syria through civil society work focused on women's rights, displacement, and the humanitarian response. I'm grateful for what Canada offered me. Today, I appear before you to speak about what Canada can offer Syria. Assad's fall gave millions of Syrians something they had not felt over decades: hope. Syria now stands at deeply fragile crossroads. More than 3 million refugees and displaced persons have returned home. Tens of thousands walked free, while hundreds of thousands remain missing. A transitional government was set to lead the country, devastated by war, repression, and institutional collapse. And yet, Syria's transition remains profoundly vulnerable. The northeast is not stable. Israeli bombardment and unlawful external interventions continue. There is still no legislative body. Sectarian massacres were committed in Sueda and on the coast by undisciplined pro-government groups. Armed groups continue to resist integration into a unified state, and more than 80% of the Syrian population lives below the poverty line. This is the reality Canada must engage with, not the Syria of yesterday's headlines. I'm here because I choose to support Syria's transition, not out of political agreement with its new authorities, but because this sensitive moment requires collaboration across different actors. Supporting a transition is not the same as endorsing it. Canada should move toward direct, principled political engagement with Syria's new authorities, in coordination with allies and with a clear expectation. Other Five Eyes partners and G7 countries have already moved by opening embassies, establishing direct cooperation and trade, and shaping the political space. Canada should not remain absent while that space is being formed by others. Diplomatic engagement is not naivety, it's not endorsement, it's recognition of reality and a decision to use presence to influence outcomes. Canada has in the past engaged political actors who emerged from armed backgrounds. History teaches us that transitions are messy and that yesterday's armed actor can, under the right conditions, become part of tomorrow's political settlement. There are 4 priorities for Canadian action. First, Canada should support an inclusive political transition. Women, minorities, civil society representatives, and Syrians from across the country must have a meaningful role in shaping the constitution, new institutions, and a national reconciliation. Second, Canada should support accountability and transitional justice. Syria cannot build a durable future on recycled impunity. That means supporting the National Transitional Justice Commission and related actors working to establish credible accountability and a clear break from the abuses of the past. Third, Canada should invest in state building and civilian recovery, not only humanitarian relief. Functioning institutions, education, local services, and security sector reform are what will determine whether this transition holds. Fourth, Canada should draw on the expertise of Syrian Canadians. Canada is home to one of the most capable Syrian diasporas in the world, including individuals with deep expertise in policy, law, technology, and the humanitarian response. This is an underutilized asset. Strength of diplomatic and consular relations would create mutual benefits for both countries. I know that 4 current Syrian cabinet ministers and an ambassador to the UN hold the Canadian citizenship and direct ties to Canada. In conclusion, Syria's transition must be inclusive, accountable, right-based, and led by Syrians themselves. If successful, it could serve as a testament to the power of international cooperation and a beacon of hope for those emerging from destruction. The question before this committee is not whether Syria's transition is perfect. It's not. Engagement is not a gift we give when transition succeeds. It's one of the tools that helps a transition succeed. The real question is whether this fragile opening is worth engaging, strengthening, and helping to shape before it collapses. And I believe it is. Thank you, merci.
Merci beaucoup pour votre
Thank you very much for your opening statement.
questions from members, beginning with MP Ziad Abul Taif. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Draid, Mr. Ozio, Mr. Bonzi, welcome to the committee and thanks for participating today. Mr. Ozio, in March 2025, Syria enacted constitutional guarantees protecting minorities and the freedom of all Syrians. Yet, in thousands of report cases, minorities, including Alawite, Druze, Kurdish, and Christians, have faced humiliation, displacement, murder, and injury, in addition to the kidnapping and raping of women and girls. To what degree has Syria been effective in abiding by constitutional guarantees and defending the freedom of Syrian minorities?
So do we just take the question and that's how we follow?
Yes.
Okay. I mean,
the question to Mr. Ozoi.
Okay, thank you. I mean, now we are in a transitional process. Honestly, we can't actually talk about the rule of law. The president is issuing some decrees from time to time, and they are passing as laws. The constitutional process is going to take probably 5 to 7 years. We don't know. But so far, what we have seen on the ground is that those kinds of guarantees have not provided the minorities with the safety, with their lives. I mean, everybody is scared. The idea is, I think everybody, both the communities in Syria and the international community, they really have to work together. I totally agree with Musna Dureld, the previous speaker. We all need to collaborate over this. It's a very difficult transition. But at the same time, we have not been able to see the government there who is receiving some kind of international legitimacy and support to help include those historically persecuted communities in the process of governance. Unfortunately, the experience on the ground for the Alawis and the Druze and the Kurds has not been good, I should say. And I mean, the words are there. Statements sometimes come from Damascus, which should be appreciated and encouraged, about the rights of minorities, of women. But in reality, unfortunately, there have been severe consequences for all of these communities. They want to negotiate a fair deal with Damascus. To my understanding, nobody is opposed to the international community working with Mr. Shara in Damascus now. But how we are going to work? Is it going to be a centralized and Islamist government repressing all the communities and the secular force and the women or not? So in that context, I would like to just repeat that, yes, Syria's transition should be supported in any way possible, but at the same time, that support should be clearly conditional to make sure that an inclusive and democratic structure emerges in Syria.
Thank you. That leads me to a second question. The United Nations Commission of Inquiry reported in August 2025 on massacres and war crimes took place across Syria in March 2025. The report found that some of the perpetrators were pro-government fighters. To what extent do you believe the interim Syrian government was involved?
I mean, we really don't have a lot of facts on the ground because it's so difficult for the journalists and, other people to go and really do, fact-finding missions. But definitely, I mean, some of them were encouraged by the government, I should say, the tribes in particular. And many of them were actually sympathetic to the government. We know some Turkish proxies were also quite active, particularly in the coastal areas where Alevi people were massacred. We know that. So it is also true that Mr. Shara is not in full control of all of those militias and armed groups. That is true. but at the same time, he is the president of the country, and he needs to find a way to stop those kinds of massacres.
But
it is understand.
Yes, we're talking about United Nations Commission's report, and that's a serious. They've got time. They went on the ground. They met with vulnerable people, displaced people, people that killed. The towns were burned.
Yep.
Women were taken, were raped, girls. And this is very credible and serious report, isn't?
Yeah, definitely. That is true. I think what they depicted there is only very limited. I mean, most recently, when the attacks on the two neighborhoods in Aleppo happened, we saw how women were killed and thrown from the balconies. I mean, those came to the attention of the international community. I mean, it is not just, all kinds of atrocities, honestly, are happening there. And whether the government in Damascus cannot, or maybe it is not willing to, but somehow, that government is also seeking to repress those communities in the process of centralizing power. It is not just some crazy people trying to kill each other. It is a process of centralization of power and destruction of those communities who actually don't feel safe vis-a-vis the new regime.
Quick question. Yeah. What methods are available to hold the government responsible or accountable for the action?
I mean, when it comes to the international community, that's what I try to stress in my speech. I mean, of course, Syria, this is a country totally devastated. Its people were killed, over 500,000, the most conservative estimates. Tens of millions of people left the country, no economy, no security, no safety. I mean, it is in ruins. And of course, Syrian government and people cannot repair the damage just by themselves. So any kind of international support is needed. Legitimacy, reconstruction, funds and normalization. I totally agree with this. But all of these should happen in a conditional way. Make sure that the regime in Syria is not going to be another repressive, authoritarian, centralized regime. I mean, the previous one was a secular one. This one may be an Islamist one. But the nature of power is important. Is it going to be a decentralized, democratic government, including all kinds of communities, not just ethnic sectarian communities, but the women and secular forces in the society or not? But if the president, the current president of the country, and his people around him are not willing to have a democratic government, and then of course the international community should have reservations. That is why I say any engagement should be strictly conditional.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We next go to MP Vandervelde. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. Each of you really spoke around the theme that in a democratic transition that's happening in Syria, it really needs to respect the diversity, the rights, and build inclusive democracy. I would like to delve a little bit into that. I'll start with you, Ms. Duraid, but I'd also like to hear from Mr. Erzoy later, particularly on the Kurdish communities. But Ms. Duraid, you have done a lot of work around women, peace, and security. And we've seen globally that when women are not just beneficiaries of aid, but actually at the table participating and have a real role in the governance processes, that the peace and the stability lasts longer. I wonder if you could tell us what you think Canada can do, given that we have our third Women, Peace and Security Action Plan. Canada has a lot of expertise in this area. Is this something where Canada might have a niche where we could provide support to the women in Syria in this regard?
Thank you for this important question. Actually, Canada was supporting the Syrian women's political movement, which is the one I'm part of, over the last 7 years, which helped us also to achieve a lot. The only women minister at the cabinet now, Hind Kabawachi, is co-founder of our movement. So the fruit of all the investment that Canada did in the past now is visible for everyone. What needed now, it's more to move from to continue to support civil society and initiatives that support women's participation, and also to put pressure on both like the society and the government to increase women's participation, but also to engage with the government in terms of like advising, supporting also the government on, for example, to remove all of the reservation on CEDAW convention, to support the National Action Plan on Peace and Security, and also to learn from other like our countries, like most likely Jordan, that achieved a lot on this file. So I think there's a lot for Canada to do, but it's just like if you don't engage with the government, you can also pressure a government to do something specifically when it comes to women's participation, because like historically in Syria, we have like women who have been marginalized by the law and by the society. So now it's the time to see it's like women, the government is leading the change of the law in Syria, and changing also the social norms as well.
Thank you very much. Some very good advice there. I'd like to turn to Mr. Hosoi. You talked about the opportunity in decentralization and some of the danger in too much centralization. We know that there are, you mentioned many minority groups. The Kurdish community in particular is sort of divided because it exists in so many countries. But we do see examples where, Kurds have self-governance and autonomy. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what it would look like to ensure that we have that kind of inclusive governance, decentralization, and we don't bake into the future structures some of the fault lines that you talked about that would then cause it to fracture in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this great question. Two things. One, yes, the Kurds live in Iraq, Iran, and Turkey and Syria. In Iraq, they have some federal structure, actually, internationally recognized also by the constitution of course, Iraq. In Syria, the Kurds demand some degree of autonomy, actually. And this is not, as I said in my speech, it's not separatism. It is to make sure that they have structures of self-governance within Syria, within a decentralized Syria, and they are trying to make their contributions, while the regime in Damascus is trying to undermine any kind of decentralization. So that is the central problem, central question. And the same goes with the Druze or the Alevis. I want to also say one more thing about the question of women. I think that is going to be the very character of the emerging regime in Syria. You see, the whole Western world was mesmerized by gorgeous, I am being a little bit sarcastic here, gorgeous Kurdish women who were fighting the ISIS. They helped greatly to defeat ISIS. They were fighters, actually. I mean, the YPG, even fashion magazines put them on their cover pages and, showing that. And now ISIS is defeated, Assad is gone, and those Kurdish women who fought against the ISIS want to be integrated into the new Syrian army. And they are being told that there is no place of women in the army. They should go back to their homes or their kitchens. You see how it works here. So I think it is the case of the Kurdish women who are trying to integrate, not to separate, but to integrate, but in an autonomous way as themselves, as, people who fought against ISIS. And the Kurds, the women, and other minorities, unfortunately, are perceived by the central government as threats, not as interlocutors to talk to together to rebuild the country. The fall of Assad is a golden opportunity for all peoples of Syria. They can together, work together, build something. But if those people in Damascus, they want to impose a strong centralizing agenda on everybody else, we suspect new conflicts will emerge in the future. So in that particular compacts, I think special attention should be paid to the situation of Kurdish women and Kurdish fighters.
Thank you.
And now they are doing diplomacy to get support so they can negotiate with the central government.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We go next to Monsieur Duceppe. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Osoi. This has been very interesting. Your latest comments, you underscored that there is a danger given that the power is much centralized around the president, and there are some political actors. You've mentioned the Kurds, the Druze. You've also mentioned women's rights that are up for grabs right now that have become an issue. But it's always quite a dilemma. How are we to know how to choose to support a transition such as that underway in Syria, given the danger of potentially legitimizing a power that continues to repress, indeed, the Kurds, the Druze, and women? So are there any red lines that this political centralization should not cross in order to ensure that other countries continue to support the Syrian transition, and what would that red line be?
Question is for me?
Oui.
It is, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so here is the situation. We don't really have a mission or a mechanism whose reports are binding for the international community, unfortunately. So what we need is two things, actually: monitoring mechanisms on the ground. Like, what is happening really on the ground? We need to periodically gather facts about what is happening on the ground. And if these developments are against the international law, we have nowadays, actually, many people don't actually even comply with the international law. But still, I mean, the issue of democratic governance, the issue of autonomy, the issue of women's rights. When I said in my speech, like, any kind of support and legitimacy should be granted based on conditionality, and those conditions should be specified clearly. For example, the U.S. Congress trying to balance the U.S. administration, they actually came up with a discussion, a good debate, and actually made some conditions. If the Syrian president, the new regime, if they do this and that, we will continue our support. But there is no blank check to you. You can't just get our support and then go and kill some minorities there. So in that sense, like institutional monitoring mechanisms and periodic reports, and if the government is not scoring well, then there should be negotiations. There should be constant pressure on the government. To be honest, in terms of ideological and political orientation, the current president is pragmatic because he needs international legitimacy, international support. But in terms of his ideological and political orientation, to be honest, we don't trust him, and we think he should do more in order to gain the trust and legitimacy from the international community.
Merci pour ça, Monsieur Osoi.
Thank you very much for that answer, Ms. Osoi. Ms. Julie, a simple question for you. What's your current evaluation of the participation of women in the current transition underway? Unfortunately, women's participation is really very limited. We need to insist on greater involvement of Syrian government, and we need to put pressure on the Syrian government to ensure that women have a seat at the table. And not only women, but also, more specifically, women from different backgrounds, to ensure that diversity, political and ethnic, remain respected. I think that women's participation is a priority for Syria right now. It must be a priority because, as you can see, you can even see visually in images that women are not able to participate. They are isolated. And Canada does have experience in this area and also has the means to put pressure on the government and to engage with the government as well as other partners to ensure that women do have a place at the table in politics and in general participation in drawing up a constitution, for example, within Parliament and really everywhere. The women who have stood for parliamentary elections, well, we're all waiting for the final list, or let's say the third list, put forward by the president of Syria to know what percentage of women will participate before the parliament gets underway here. A quick question for you, Mr. Bonsi. Could you please tell us whether the current crisis in the Middle East involving Israel, Iran, and the United States is having an effect on the transition underway in Syria? This is for you, Mr. Bonsi.
Sure, of course. The short answer is yes. Obviously, Syria is less impacted than places that have been drawn into the war directly. But as I mentioned briefly in my remarks, obviously the humanitarian needs are so high, more disruption, more displacement, more disorder in the region means donors will be stretched thin. But crucially, Damascus has gambled on Gulf support. Needs are immense. They've gambled on, or bet on, let's say, Gulf support directly to the government, including the paying of salaries, state salaries, as well as investment in the broader economy. We can all imagine that in Riyadh and Doha, as well as the Emirates, priorities are going to change as a result of this regional war. They'll need to spend more on their own defense and other domestic priorities. So that will leave a huge gap that others are going to need to fill. Canada, obviously, here has a major potential positive role to play.
Thank you very much. We start the next round of questions, beginning with MP Leanne Rood. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, witnesses, for being here today. My first question is for Mr. Osoi. Canada claims to fight terrorism, yet we are engaging with a government that emerged from an Islamist armed movement while sidelining the very forces that helped defeat ISIS. How is that justifiable to Canadians? Oh, I believe you're on mute, sir.
Yeah. So, yeah, we are asking the same question, how actually a person who was listed as a terrorist 2 years ago, now he is being welcomed in every major capital in the world, in Europe and the US and Washington, D.C. So we see that, I mean, there is some pragmatism here. In the words of President Trump, who I don't want to quote at all, but here, he said, this is the guy we could find, actually. That is what he's saying. And so, I mean, that country really wants to rebuild. I mean, it's not just about the regime, it's the people. We are talking about tens of millions of people who are trying to rebuild the country. So in that sense, I mean, it is engagement. I mean, Assad or Shara or some other person can come there, but somebody will be leading this transition. Ideally, some democratic-minded, secular and pro-women person would be ideal, but, given the geography, that is the unfortunate situation. What can we do now from inside and outside is actually to make sure that although Islamist, although the regime having kind of authoritarian tendencies, the international community should work as like checks and balances to somehow put this regime into some right track. We know it is a very difficult situation, but if it is left to its own kind of conditions, I suspect we are going to have a very kind of dysfunctional and very repressive political regime in Syria. So the engagement of the international community, I think, is necessary, not for al-Shara, but for the peoples of Syria, that whole multiplicity. Everybody is trying to come out of that war, but that support should be very carefully organized and conditional on some fundamental principles.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bonsi, Canada has moved towards engagement with the Syrian Authority linked to Ahmed al-Shara and removed Hayat Tahrir al-Sham from its terrorist list. Can you speak towards what due diligence was conducted to determine this leadership no longer poses an extremist threat, and is Canadian policy like this legitimizing former jihadist networks?
Thank you for the question. I don't want to. Others in the room can speak better to the specifics of Canadian policy, so I'll leave that aside. But what I will say is, I think, look, the background of the current leadership in Damascus is well known and not in dispute. I think what we can say, based not on their words but on their actions over the years, they have evolved very concretely and quite a long way on the ideological spectrum. They are still Islamist. I don't think they would dispute that. But they have become much more pragmatic and also less authoritarian, or let's say less totalitarian over time. They have shown that they respond to incentives, positive and negative incentives. So I don't think anyone would expect countries around the world to be trusting what's in the hearts of any other actor in the international scene, let alone a former jihadist group. So we don't trust, nobody's going to trust what's in their hearts. They're going to judge based on actions. What al-Shara and those around him have shown is that they respond to positive and negative incentives. And so
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I'm going to move on. I just have a minute left here. Mr. Ozoy, Turkey, a NATO ally, has conducted repeated military operations in northern Syria, targeting Kurdish cities and Kurdish forces, including the SDF. Turkey's actions are seen as undermining regional stability and counterterrorism efforts. What consequences should be imposed in response?
I mean, Turkey has been, I would say, violating international law. See, I was a member of parliament for 8 years. Now I myself have to live in Germany in exile. I can't go back to my country. So, I mean, the kind of the record, the democratic record, the human rights record of Turkey is very much well known. Unfortunately, Europe and the US and everybody else has turned a blind eye on the kind of the deterioration of human rights and democracy in Turkey. Again, I mean, like, engagement is a must in Syria, in Turkey, but as we say, all engagement should be strictly based upon conditionality. And if Turkey agrees to some democratic standards, good. If not, then there should be consequences for it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we go to MP Stephen Guilbeault. Vous avez 5 minutes.
You have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Our witnesses for being with us and sharing their experience and knowledge. Thank you very much. Mr. Bonsi, I would like to pick up on the question from my colleague from the Bloc Québécois earlier. You had a brief amount of time to respond to what you feel are the broader implications of the regional conflict under transition. I'm offering you more time to elaborate on the short answer you gave earlier.
Sure, thanks for that. So again, I really want to start with the humanitarian plus development, right? Because the material need of Syria's population is just so massive. I mean, I mentioned earlier, there's 15 million people in need, according to UN estimates. That's the overwhelming majority of the country. That's almost everyone who lives there, right? Needs are immense. When obviously you're all familiar with the overall global constraining of international aid over the years, especially in light of changes by the Trump administration. When you add to that how much thinly everyone will be stretched in light of the regional war, especially what's happening in neighboring Lebanon, and nearly 200,000 people have crossed from Lebanon to Syria during the current war. And on top of that further, what we all expect will be a decline in Gulf funding for the reasons I mentioned, because, again, that was a big part of the bet in Damascus. You're simply left with massive needs that could stunt the entire recovery. And I think what we're all agreeing with here on the panel is that Syria needs engagement, Syria needs material support. Some of that support should be humanitarian and unconditional. People need to live. Some of that support will be more development, and of course, Canada and other states will want to see certain things in response, whether how tangible or how conditional. You will want to see certain you have political expectations for that support. I think that's understandable, but the scale needs to be massive in order for Syrians to be able to recover, for people to stay in their homes, to return to their homes, and build a new life for themselves.
Thank you for that. Another question for you. How can Canada and like-minded countries balance our commitment to accountability for atrocities with the need to support progress towards social and political stability?
Thanks. Another great question. There's no easy way to answer this, because obviously you have tension here between crucial goals shared by all Syrians. This civil war, the dictatorship that led the country into the civil war, we're talking about egregious crimes of just industrial scale torture and collective punishment committed by the regime, and egregious acts by other actors, including in the opposition, and of course ISIS at the top of the list. The trauma, the scale, and the intensity of what Syrians are looking to overcome demands a process for transitional justice. At the same time, moving on, keeping the country together, helping the country overcome its polarization and division requires, making sure that the social fabric is maintained. And you see Damascus caught between these things, and I know its supporters and critics in the international community are also caught. In other words, the tension between justice and people wanting to move on and pursue reconciliation. There's no easy answer.
Thank you. More time, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Madame Duraid, merci beaucoup d'être avec nous.
Ms. Duraid, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you for your opening statement. In that opening statement, at the beginning, you proposed that Canada should open an embassy. This is not necessarily a consensus among those we have heard on this topic, but basically, from your point of view, what is in favor of doing that? Thank you very much for your question. The criteria would be, first and foremost, to offer, a clear view of Canada's intent to be more engaged, more interactive in the area and with Syria, as well as to support civil society in Syria. But the criteria in favor of opening an embassy, I think that should be based on requests and needs, both in Canada and in Syria, of citizens to make their lives easier, given that the region here, there's been a war here or in neighboring countries alongside Syria for such a long time. At present, Syria is more stable than it was in the past. Now there is the war between the United States and Iran, yet Syria is stable. There have been a number of activities involving Lebanon and Syria, where Syria has been taken to be a partner to help with evacuations, humanitarian evacuations, for citizens, for example, or personnel working in the embassies of a number of countries. So, as I say, it will either be citizen demand, the need for services, or the political will to engage with Syria. I think that's what's at issue. Thank you, Mr. Duceppe.
0.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur Bonzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Bonzi, you mentioned the Trump administration's drastic cuts to U.S. aid, and Then we have the crisis in the Middle East, which has led to lesser humanitarian assistance flowing from the Gulf countries. And let's look at other countries as well. Japan, which has dropped its international assistance to pretty much zero. And Canada as well is not doing well on this front. $2.5 million cut yet again, billion rather, although we're spending $35 billion on defense, it would seem, on the other side of the spending chart. This is something we've learned recently in Ottawa. Now, perhaps you have a chance today to explain to the government, which is now a majority government, just how important international assistance is for Syria more particularly. Over to you.
Yeah, look, we all saw in negative terms how destabilizing the Syrian war became through, basic pushing out millions of Syrians fleeing the war, radicalization, and all the negative ways that unfolded. Syria now has an opportunity to be basically the reverse of that. It is, as others have mentioned, an island of stability in a region at war right now. It has a chance to become a success story. And its leadership does need to be engaged conditionally, as others are saying, but constructively, and the country needs material support. In a world where so much seems to be getting worse, Syria is a place that is actually getting better relative to how horrible things have been over the last 15 years and beyond. So it is worthy of your investment, even in a time of ever more constrained resources.
Peut-être Madame Dureid là-dessus.
And a question perhaps to you, Ms. Dureid, the same question basically.
Désolée, j'ai pas entendu.
I'm so sorry, I did not hear the full question. The importance of including international assistance and international development among our budgetary items. You have a chance to send a message to the Carney government to perhaps bring back some funding that has been cut from that envelope.
Les besoins humanitaires ici, c'est immense.
Yes, humanitarian need here is considerable. It's immense. So we cannot guarantee a good transition without humanitarian assistance for citizens because we already have so many problems inherited from our recent past. Canada has already invested considerably in the humanitarian aid space, as well as to support civil society within Syria. And this is something that should be continued in support of a transition which is currently fragile. Civilians are, truly, there are about 1.5 million people in internal camps and displaced people then, internally displaced people, and there are so many refugees now returning to Syria. And with the current war in the Middle East, there's so much pressure given the price of oil and gas and the basic needs, for people living in poverty and in facing food insecurity. So I think that, yes, indeed, we really need this. So many people need it. Thank you very, very much, Ms. Dureid.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have a question about Russia. Russia has 2 bases in Syria, an air base and a naval base. The current government has suspended the 49-year lease, as we understand it. It's not clear what the implications are of that. Could you tell us, all of you, what your analysis or assessment is of the future of these naval and air bases in Syria? Russian naval and air bases in Syria.
What do you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, for this, we should really go back even very briefly to what happened during the HTS-led rebel offensive that overthrew the country, because that tells us why Russia's still there. Basically, during that offensive, as it was gaining ground, HTS, now the current leadership of Syria, reached out to the Russians and basically negotiated that they negotiated to keep the Russians from backing the regime to the very last moment. So about halfway through their offensive, the Russians basically cut the regime loose, and that was the result of diplomatic engagement between the two. Now, it's my understanding that there was no particular promise about the future other than the principle that the fall of the Assad regime did not mean that Russia would be kicked out immediately thereafter, and discussions would follow. Now, obviously, Syria's most important relationships right now are they're with Turkey, they're with Saudi Arabia, they're with the United States, and Western countries generally, to include Canada. Russia is very far down the list. They do not have a friendly relationship with Russia at this stage, but they are trying to prevent the resumption of tensions. Obviously, Russia backed the Assad regime to the hilt throughout the war. There's a lot of bad blood between Damascus and Moscow now, but they're trying to maintain a, let's say, normal relationship. And I think the future of those bases will be under constant negotiation between Damascus and Moscow. There will never be trust, but they will also, I think, try to avoid making unnecessary problems for each other. They'll look for shared interests where they exist, but they'll never be allies, I don't imagine.
From my side, I think what Syria did, and we saw last week, Mr. Zelensky visited Syria, and it was like a sign of a trust and partnership between Syria and Ukraine to overcome all of the Russian atrocities and violations against both countries. And Syria is trying to neutralize itself from Iran and from Russia. And the current war between Iran and the US, it's a great example about this, how Syria is now neutral and preventing the support for Hezbollah from Iran, which was the passage and like the bridge between Iran and Hezbollah in the past. Another point here, I think there's also a legal implication of what Assad also concluded with Russia in the past. So the fate of these bases, it's not only has like a political a view, but also legal view, because Russia got like a contractor from the Assad regime for 40 years on one of the military bases, specifically naval bases. So it's a complicated question, but I think so far the signs that we have in terms of like collaboration with Ukraine and also neutralizing the Syria from previous like perpetrators, I would say, is a good sign for the future.
And I can just add that although there were some military delegations from Syria to Moscow, we know that, so the regime definitely will want to somehow diversify, foreign policy. I mean, you can't simply just rely on one the center of power. I think that is one thing. And at the same time, Russia does have the veto power at the United Nations. And, when it comes to Syria, it's very, very important. Still, we are working on, within the framework, the resolution 2015. So I think Russia does have some leverage there, and they will definitely want to keep those bases there, given that Eastern Mediterranean is going to be a very, very, very important kind of geopolitical location, energy-wise, security-wise. So for now, I think it is being postponed, that kind of relationship. But once this regional war is over, I think we will see new developments, and I don't think Shara can somehow simply neutralize Syria from Russia.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We finally go to MP Christina Tesser-Dirksen. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks everyone for indulging me while I ask a question today as a guest here at Foreign Affairs. I was an undergraduate student studying political science when the Arab Spring broke out, and I remember following it closely, and we've followed it closely since, and the tremendous loss of life and the destruction of infrastructure as well. And I wanted to ask Mr. Bonsi about the status of international financial institutions or private investors that might be working on rebuilding infrastructure in Syria, particularly with the concern surrounding, opportunists that sometimes pop up when the regulatory environment might be a little unstable, and particularly concerns about corruption and contracts and that sort of thing. Is this something that your group monitors?
Thanks for that. Far from my personal expertise, but I would say a couple things here. I mean, one, obviously the removal of most sanctions, as well as the UN terrorist designations, Canadian, U.S., other terrorist designations, has opened the playing field economically to an extent, but not completely, right? You still have all kinds of obstacles, including that the U.S. still designates Syria as a state sponsor of terrorism, which dates back decades into the Assad regime, but remains on the books. So we're still talking about a constrained environment. And we should also note that, as has been mentioned earlier, rule of law is still very limited. We're in the middle of a transition and a transformation from one regime to a new order. So in that environment, I agree. It's there's a lot of there's plenty of room for, let's say, lack of transparency, and this is something that you see Syrian civil society really playing, I think, a key role on. I'll just briefly say, on this and on so many other issues, you have a robust role played by a very rich array of Syrian civil society groups who push back on government corruption and push back on all kinds of mistakes and disagreements. And this is a reason for hope, I think, moving forward.
Great, thank you. And just to follow up quickly, so how would you measure progress? There's financial inputs and outputs, but is there other measurable, deliverable type of indicators that you would use to see if infrastructure development is actually progressing the way it should?
You'll see I'm tentative here because I'm not an economist, but I think what a lot of Syrians are looking for is very concrete things, like number of hours of electricity, that how much is that going up and where, and so on and so forth. I mean, we're talking about a level of destruction to critical infrastructure that is utterly immense. And the recovery will be measured in years, obviously.
Thanks very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. That concludes this round of questions. Thank you so much to all our guests for your appearance before the committee. We will now briefly suspend in order to prepare for the next panel. Order. I would now like to invite our witnesses for the second hour. From Islamic Relief Canada, we have Tufail Khan, Chief Executive Officer, joining us by video conference. From the Syrian Canadian Congress, Dr. Ayman Al-Yassini, President and Founder, who's here in person, welcome. And from the Union of Medical Relief Organizations Canada, we have Dr. Anas Al-Qassam, Doctor and Vice President. Welcome. Up to 5 minutes will be given for opening remarks, after which we will proceed with rounds of questions. So I now invite Mr. Khan to make an opening statement, not more than 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, honourable members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. My name is Tufail Hussain Khan, and I am the CEO of Islamic Relief Canada. I've been a humanitarian for the past 21 years, and I'm here today to share what we have witnessed on the ground and what we have learned from more than a decade of service in Syria. Islamic Relief Canada is Canada's third largest humanitarian and development organization, working in over 40 countries, including some of the most complex and fragile contexts. From the outset, I would like to highlight that our mandate is a humanitarian one. We adopt a position of neutrality in the countries where we operate, including Syria. So my comments today will be about our mandate and experience, which includes providing life-saving relief and support for development of all affected communities. We've been present in Syria since 2012, operating from 6 locations with approximately 130 staff. We serve people based on need, regardless of gender, background, or identity. Our teams support communities across religious and ethnic lines. Since the beginning of the conflict, we have reached over 1 million a year through our water projects, 400,000 a year through our healthcare interventions, and have distributed over 5 million food packs a year. Over the years, staff have faced serious risks to their own lives, exposure to active conflict, and incidents such as detention or kidnapping for ransom. We lost 2 members, one of them in an airstrike in 2015. Despite these challenges, our teams continue to deliver aid with the highest degree of care. We currently support over 80 healthcare facilities, reaching more than 400,000 patients annually, while also providing food, water, psychosocial support, livelihoods training, and orphan care. As the political landscape has shifted, sanctions have been lifted and there is progress in Syria. However, the humanitarian situation remains extremely challenging. There is more stability, overall more security, and we have access in order to conduct our work. The situation, though, remains an emergency. According to UNICEF, 16.5 million people in Syria require humanitarian assistance. While over 800,000 refugees returned last year, return does not mean recovery. Families are coming back to destroyed homes, damaged schools, and weakened health systems. We see the crisis evolving rather than ending. Food insecurity remains widespread. Women and children continue to face the most severe consequences of displacement and instability. From my experience, emergency relief and long-term recovery must happen simultaneously. To achieve this, we engage with local authorities in different ways. First, we engage for project approvals and, where relevant, for the selection of infrastructure to be rehabilitated. Second, we help develop capacity in areas where relief needs to become structural. For instance, in clinics where Islamic Relief was heavily involved, we train local doctors and health agencies to take this on. We're increasing our focus on infrastructure and essential services, such as healthcare, water access, and community systems that will benefit hundreds of thousands in the coming years. In 2025, we implemented a project in Aleppo and Idlib, supporting over 130,000 women and girls. This included essential medicine and reproductive health. The project has been initially co-funded by GAC, up to £1.25 million, and it's renewed into 2026 with an additional $1 million in Canadian dollars funding for coordinated humanitarian and development efforts. To do this as a member of the Humanitarian Coalition and as an ongoing partner of the Government of Canada and GAC, I have a few recommendations. Sustained support is critical. First, Syria continues to require long-term humanitarian and development assistance at scale. Second, recovery must be community-centered and inclusive, ensuring access to essential services such as healthcare, food, water, education, and livelihoods. Third, we need Canada to continue supporting, protecting, and facilitating humanitarian access. Canada has an important role to play, not only as a donor, but as a principled and trusted partner. On this path, Islamic Relief Canada will always stand ready to help. Thank you, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for your statement. I now invite Dr. Al-Yassini to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes.
Honorable members, I'm honored to be with you today to address the issue of the future of Syria in the context of the recent developments over the past year and a half. I'm with the Syrian Canadian Congress, a community organization that came into existence about a year ago, slightly over a year ago, with the purpose of promoting community engagement, human rights, democratic governance, and building bridges between Canada and Syria. The Syrian Canadian diaspora is not recent in the Canadian mosaic. It goes back to the early 20th century, but since 2015, we've seen the expansion and the growth of that community, becoming an active and viable community. In my address today, I would like to cover a number of areas. One, dealing with the historical background briefly, domestic and regional challenges, areas of fragility, and recommendations, policy recommendations. The Syrian situation today is one of inheriting authoritarian rule, authoritarian domination, control, almost a failed state. Beginning in 2011, the government's response to popular protests led to widespread destruction and collapse of the economy, mass displacement, and also deep structural challenges that complicate the political transition and national reconciliation. The areas of fragility include the slow economic growth. It includes inflation, unemployment, currency devaluation. There's limited governance capacity, and years of authoritarianism led to nothing but total collapse of good governance. And the third is the incomplete and incompetent security sector to forge a common security framework for the country, although some progress has been made in recent months. And the fourth point is the minority communities. The Assad regime succeeded in establishing itself in gaining favorable reaction from foreign governments on the grounds that it is the protector of minority communities. This is a major falsehood. Instead of talking about minority protection or the protection of minority communities, we need to address the issue of protecting the entire society, the entire community through good governance and democratic values. The Syrian government made some serious progress in the areas of security, coordination of the public service, delivery of some services, but these are limited changes, limited improvements, and need cooperation and collaboration with international providers and partners. Canada has a role to play in this process. In brief, I would like to make the following recommendations, policy recommendations. One is to designate a Damascus-based ambassador and embassy to work on the development of the private sector, of trade, of consular services in the country. The current ambassador in Beirut, covering Syria as well, is doing an excellent job within the mandate that is assigned to him and to his embassy staff. We need to go one step further and work on the establishment of a Damascus-based embassy. The second is to facilitate private sector engagement by encouraging Canadian businesses to conduct trade and to participate in the reconstruction of Syria. The civil society is an important variable in Syrian society, and it needs to be supported and assisted. The public administration in Syria is in total collapse, and also Canada has a lot to offer in providing assistance. And finally, to rely on the Canadian diaspora, to utilize the Canadian diaspora, the Syrian Canadian diaspora, in providing services and assisting in the reconstruction of Syria. Mr. Chair, honorable members, Syria stands at a critical moment. The choices are limited. The choice we make today is either to return to the past of destruction, social conflict, and regional instability, or to move forward and judge the government's performance based on deliverables and build a better society. Canada has a long track in the Middle East going back to the 50s, and we need to capitalize on that, long track record. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. I now invite Dr. Al-Qasim to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Honorable Committee Chair, distinguished members of the committee, dear colleagues and witnesses. My name, by the way, is Anas Al-Qasim, K-A-S-S-E-M. I appear before you as a chairman of the Union of Medical Care and Relief Organizations and as a VP of the Canadian office, but also as a Canadian surgeon and Syrian surgeon who has personally conducted more than 20 medical missions into Syria during the 14-year war, the worst man-made disaster as per UN since World War II. Even Gaza is not worse by Syria in terms of the numbers, by the way. It's horrible. I've been to Gaza, but Syria has been the worst since World War II. During these missions, I worked in field hospitals along the border of Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, and later inside Syria, in Aleppo, Idlib, Raqqa, rural Damascus. The only city I wasn't able to get in because it's so dangerous for me personally is Damascus, my city. We helped establish hospitals, Bab al-Hawa Hospital, one of them at the Turkish border, with more than 1,500 surgeries being performed on a monthly basis during the war. We also created primary healthcare centers and the first mental health hospital in northern Syria. I had the honor to initiate the trauma registry in Syria during the war with over 200,000 injury cases, with their demographics confirming that 50% of the victims were women and children. In these field hospitals, I personally treated with a lot of Canadian doctors who had the honor, I had the honor to go with them to Syria. We treated thousands of patients, but the majority of them were Sunni. The truth is that Sunni majority paid the heaviest price under Assad regime, enduring decades of targeted slaughter, bombings, and mass detention. Many of these men, women, and children, I still remember some of them, died in my hands. I saw firsthand how Assad, Iran, and Russia deliberately targeted hospitals, maybe for the first time in modern history, making medical care almost impossible in many areas. Now, with the regime gone, the priority is ensuring that the minorities feel safe and included, because lasting stability requires healing all wounds, not repeating the cycle of exclusion. While there have been occasional tensions and setbacks expected in any post-conflict transition, but the overall trend, as we heard from many colleagues and witnesses before, has been towards stabilization and inclusive governance. In January 2026, President al-Shara issued Presidential Decree number 13, restoring full citizenship to Kurds stripped of it in 1962. declaring Nowruz as a national holiday for the first time in the Syrian history, and also launched reconciliation committees for both Alawites and Druze communities. The new government has been incredibly open to hearing from advocates and humanitarian organizations like ours. I was invited to meet President Shara in New York during the UN General Assembly in September of last year. I also met the Minister of Social Affairs, our friend, a fellow Syrian Canadian, Honorable Mrs. Hind Kabawat, where we talk about how our organizations can empower women in healthcare and expanding women care services and providing psychosocial supports to thousands of vulnerable women and children in Syria. These talks are not just symbolic. The new government is ready to listen and work, and our discussions are resulting in tangible changes. Dear Chair and committee members, as humanitarians, we must shift our focus from short-term aid to long-term development in Syria. Syria cannot build through food aid and mobile clinics alone. We must invest in healthcare infrastructure, education, nursing programs, medical training, women empowerment in the healthcare leadership. This year, I met also the Minister of Health, Honorable Mr. Ali, to discuss how our organization can support strengthening the Syria fragile healthcare system. This is only possible because of the funds that we are able to receive from countries like Germany through the GIZ, EU, and recently the GAG in Canada, as we received generous funds for the healthcare system and humanitarian aids. This is where Canada can lead and is uniquely positioned to do so. Canada is pioneer in medical education. I graduated from the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons here in Ottawa in 2006. And the Royal College has been a global leader in competency-based medical education through innovative CanMEDS framework and competence by design, CBD. This model has served as an inspiration for many countries in the Middle East and elsewhere. And we can now transfer this valuable expertise to support the doctors and nurses who suffered for years under the previous Syrian regime. The next decade will determine whether Syria remains dependent on a humanitarian assistance or begins a genuine recovery. Investing in healthcare and education today will build stability, strengthen communities, and support inclusive governance of all Syrians. I thank the committee and the Government of Canada for their leadership and continued engagement at this historic moment for Syria. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement. I now open the floor for questions, beginning with MP Ziad Abul Taif. You have 6 minutes. No. We're going with Tamara? Okay. With MP Kronis, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, and I thank you very much for your hospitality and letting me join you today. Dr. Kassan, I wanted to ask, when was your last trip to Syria?
After we call it liberation of Syria, I visited Syria 4 times. Last one was in February, just more than a month ago.
So you've been there quite a lot. I'm quite taken by the fact that there's been a mental hospital opened in the north, because it's when you think about the kind of PTSD that comes out of war and out of the conditions that Syrians have been living under, and quite frankly that Syrian Canadians have been have also lived under, and the worry that people have for their relatives back home. Can you just tell us a bit more about that and what it's doing that's innovative in terms of treating the PTSD that comes out of the circumstances that people have lived through?
Thank you very much for the question. We have been focusing in our organization on primary health care and psychosocial support and mental health. As you said, more than probably 2 million children in Syria are suffering from severe mental health illnesses as per UN. So we took this initiative because we found in northern Syria there has been no single hospital for admissions. So we go to the tents and we try to support the children, vulnerable population with a psychosocial support. But a lot of them, they need admissions. They need ongoing medications. They need ongoing care in the hospital. So we started this hospital about probably 4 years ago, and we have admitted thousands of children into the hospital. A lot of them, they're out of the hospital now, and they are back to their villages and cities in Syria.
Well, it's always amazing how resilient children are even in war. But how widespread is PTSD among civilians?
It is a huge. You'll be surprised, Honourable Member, that myself, I was victim of PTSD, both after coming back from Gaza and from Syria, and I needed psychosocial support in Canada. So if a physician goes to Syria for a week or two, or a nurse, Canadian nurse or a foreigner might need some treatment, imagine children and women that I remember one day I was in a hospital there, and it was safe and everything was fine, but the child was always hearing bombs constantly, and he could not sleep. So it is widespread, and I think it's way underestimated. But we need, and Canada has a huge, and pioneer expertise in mental health. And I think we can deploy a lot of help, not only funding, a lot of expertise and help by our great mental health specialists in Canada to treat thousands of vulnerable people in Syria.
What kind of treatments are available in the hospital that you've described in northern Syria, the mental hospital that you've started?
We started providing them with medications. During the war, it was only counseling. We did not have a lot of drugs that are badly needed for depression, anxiety, PTSD, and so forth. And now we have the ability even to provide deep depression, anxiety, some cases with electric shock and all these kind of methods to treat deep depression. And so we have even educated and trained nurses in mental health and psychosocial support. In Syria, unfortunately, there is a big lack, even from before the war, in psychiatry specialty. So that was an issue, and we were lucky to have a lot of psychiatrists, Canadian psychiatrists, volunteering online through the telemedicine to treat thousands of patients through online telemedicine to this hospital.
You made a comment near the end of your remarks around how important the next decade is within the Syrian context to be able to see whether Syria will truly be able to separate itself from the proxy wars that have really destroyed it, being waged by the likes of Iran and Russia, and the alternative. What are the consequences in your mind of not treating the PTSD that is so pervasive in war, in sort of post-war areas like Syria?
This is a very important question. A lot of workers, including my colleagues, nurses and doctors in Syria, in order to be functioning, in order to go back to the healthcare sector and be quite effective, we need to treat them. We always underestimated the healthcare workers that are impacted by PTSD. And every time I go there, I figure out that we need to focus on the workers first before even focusing on the patients. So I think a nation program focusing on all healthcare workers, talking about my specialty, would be very valuable in bringing them back to work and be more efficient. Otherwise, we're going to be missing a lot of healthcare workers in Syria.
You also made reference in your remarks to this work really being meaningful in that you're getting to work with mostly women and children and really seeing the impact of the Assad regime in terms of humanitarian violations of international humanitarian law. Is there any joint work being done with the demographics that you're working with in to be able to also help pull evidence together and assist international investigators in doing the work that needs to be done there?
So we have been working with some groups, like even Muzna group in Syria. She was one of the witnesses in the morning. A lot of women, organizations in Syria, healthcare organizations, human rights organizations in Syria and internationally, in order to heal, all these wounds. And there has been some successful, but I think it needs a lot of funds and a lot of work going forward.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for the work you do.
We next go to MP Van den Beld. You have 6 minutes.
Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. And I do appreciate all the witnesses. I want to talk a little bit about, it was just very briefly touched on the number of people who are returning, because when we've seen in other places, when you see large numbers of people returning, it can also put pressure not just on the food and the infrastructure, but also the social relations. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about both the pressures that are coming from the returns, but also the opportunities that this is resulting in.
Is it for me or Mr. Yassine?
I will give each of you a little bit of time to answer that, maybe starting online with Mr. Khan, and then we'll go to the room.
Sure. Thank you. We've seen serious challenges because people are returning to destroyed villages, cities, roads have been destroyed, hospitals, clinics, water projects, and unfortunately, these people returning are dependent on aid agencies like Islamic Relief. And the burden is ever increasing, unfortunately. We now have a long-term development plan, which is to rebuild everything I've just mentioned. Rebuilding of roads, clinics, hospitals, schools. It's a very ambitious plan. The challenge we face, of course, is that there is a dearth of funding available for long-term development plans. Syria is no longer in the headlines, and over 90% of our income comes from the community. A very generous, the most generous faith-based community in Canada, in the Muslim community, but they're not hearing anything about Syria anymore. So we're struggling to raise funds for these very important long-term development projects. And this is where the Canadian government really, we need the Canadian government to continue supporting those efforts, because right now, without the support of GAC and the Canadian government, we would struggle to deliver these very important projects, which will only help not just returning refugees, but also the wider population inside Syria.
So I can add to this as well. We have probably about 1.5 million refugees internally displaced in Syria, despite the end of the war. I have been to the Turkish border, and I have seen thousands of tents. The people have been living there for 10 or 13 years. Imagine a lot of them were born there. The child doesn't know anything about from a tent. So when I asked some of the tents, some of the people leaders in these kind of camps, they told me that we needed three things. We need to rebuild our houses in the villages, but we need healthcare, trusted healthcare, and we need education. And nobody's going to go back to their villages just to build a house if there is no healthcare, if there's no education. So I think that's an excellent question. But if we can help by building the education, the healthcare in these villages and towns, not only just building their towns and bridges and so forth, a lot of these will come back to their villages.
The situation as it is now, we have an increase in poverty in Syria, a rise in the cost of living. There are many challenges on government services. The government is incapable of providing electricity and some basic services to the society at large. In addition to that, we have the influx of internally displaced refugees trying to return to their places of birth or where they came from, and that is adding tremendous pressure on the government, on government services, and the economy as a whole. Plus the returnees from Turkey and Europe. Fortunately, there are discussions going on between the Syrian government and the European community, Germany in particular, to coordinate the return of Syrian refugees. There's a need to mention that some of the European countries, Germany, for example, seems to perceive the situation of Syrian refugees as a problem that they need to address by encouraging Syrian refugees to return. However, the issue is not that simple. The return of Syrian refugees from Germany to Syria needs to be voluntary. It needs to be coordinated with the Syrian government and to be matched with building a reasonable infrastructure to absorb the returnees.
Thank you. And I would say that in Canada, we're benefiting tremendously by the Syrian refugees who are contributing. Really quickly, I'd like to go back to Mr. Khan. And we think about women in these kind of crisis situations as victims, as beneficiaries of aid. But what have you seen in terms of women as active participants in the solutions and the rebuilding? Mr. Khan?
Sorry, excuse me, I forgot to unmute. What a mistake to make. One project that I've already mentioned is the GAC project, which is through which we are supporting 130,000 women and children. And key to designing that program was involvement of women in Syria. For us, it's a very important principle to ensure that beneficiaries are involved in the design of any program. And so they have been very much active participants in the designing of many of our programs. Many of our programs are centered on the needs of the most vulnerable in society. We have a needs criteria wherever we work. And at the top of that needs criteria are female-headed households, for example.
Thank you.
So we will always, ensure that they are involved.
Thank you very much. We next go to MP Duceppe. You have 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Al-Yassini, Dr. Al-Yassini, you represent an important Syrian diaspora settled here in Canada. Could you tell us to what extent or, what level of support or confidence the Syrian diaspora here in Canada has in the transition currently underway in Syria?
In Canada is a reflection of the Syrian society at large. There are divergent views among the communities. Some of these views are driven by ethnic affiliation or religious affiliation, or there are other factors, political affiliation of these individuals or their families. On the whole, the Syrian community in Canada is encouraged by the change. They see that, and they do realize that the Assad regime was a totalitarian government, abusive. The victims of the Assad regime included minorities. This is in contrast to the perception which some have, or the misperception, that the Assad regime had protected minorities. So they are encouraged, they would like to see changes, but they are somewhat impatient with the rate of changes that are taking place. It is a difficult task for any government, and here I'm not justifying one or other policy, but it is a difficult task for any government, particularly a government that came into existence as a result of opposition and military activities, to become a civilian government ruling a complex society. On the level of the presidency, and this is my reading of the situation, and the cabinet, there are good intentions, but then the mentality of authoritarianism, the mentality of sectarianism seem to have filtered down throughout society, and that is being reflected on the levels of government decisions. For example, in the government of Damascus, some decisions were taken recently that seem to that do antagonize the Christian community, or did antagonize the Christian community and other communities. The government mishandling of the protest in Latakia. That is other challenge. So in brief, there's a need to take it issue by issue and look at the situation as it evolves. But the Syrian community as a whole, I believe the vast majority are supportive of the changes, but would like to see more happening.
Merci, c'était très bien. Une réponse très...
Thank you. That was a very detailed answer. A quick question to Mr. Khan and Dr. Al-Qassem. You've mentioned, or we have been mentioning as well, the reduced financial support from a number of countries. Do you think that the budget currently available, not solely from Canada, but from all European countries and even richer countries, suffice? And are they properly targeted based on the needs of the Syrian population? Perhaps Mr. Qassem, you could speak to public health, and Mr. Khan, go ahead. You can begin.
Yeah, the reduction in ODA from countries across the world, especially USAID, which was by far the largest contributor of aid to the international development and humanitarian system, has been nothing short of devastating, frankly speaking. And we're seeing the effects on the ground in Syria. 16.5 million people. 16.5 million people are dependent on humanitarian organizations like Islamic Relief. This is beyond organizations like Islamic Relief, who depend very much on voluntary income from the Muslim community. Like I mentioned earlier, over 90% of our income comes from the community. This level of needs governmental multinational support. It needs large, huge amounts for us to make the immediate and lasting change that is needed for the people of Syria. Otherwise, it seems like we're just applying plasters to this very difficult situation.
Merci, Monsieur Al-Qassem, rapidement.
No, thank you very much.
And Mr. Al-Qassem, quickly.
Honorable member for this question. So I agree, the pull out of USAID has been a big blow. In addition to that, I would say recently we have seen in our organization that a lot of funds have been directed toward Gaza, Yemen, and there's a lot of conflicts going on in the area. So we still receive funds from Canada, we receive funds from European partners, but there has been more channels to help other conflicts, Sudan, for instance, as well, and that impacted Syria big time. So we are quite, concerned about the shortage of funding for the humanitarian and development, initiatives.
Thank you very much. We go next to MP Stephen Guilbeault. You have 5 minutes. No, sorry. Ziad Abul Taif, right? Yes. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the witnesses for appearing before committee today, and welcome. Mr. Al-Yassini, you are the president and founder of the Syrian Canadian Congress. And you spoke about the ethnic and religious groups among the Syrian community in Canada. Do you believe that your Congress represent all these communities?
Not, no. I think it would be quite foolish to think for any group that they do represent the entire Syrian community or the diaspora. The Syrian community, like other ethnic cultural communities in Canada, is diverse. They have different interpretations of the past and the present, let alone the future. So do we represent the Syrian community as a whole? No. However, we do represent values of good governance, commitment to human rights, inclusive society, and we also believe that Canada has a lot to share with Syria.
You spoke about very important Canadian values, human rights, democracy, inclusiveness. Also, Dr. Al-Qassem spoke about safe communities, safe minorities in Canada and included. That's what So the question, do you believe that these ethnic and religious communities are safe in Syria now?
These communities, and when I say these communities, I'm talking about cultural, ethnic, and religious communities, are under pressure internally and externally. Internally, they are under pressure because of the legacy of authoritarianism. And as a matter of fact, I will go even one step further to say that since Syria's independence, communalism has always been at the forefront in the relationships between communities. They are under pressure on the regional front, from the regional front as well. Israel is not assisting the situation in any way. The Israeli attempts to galvanize the Druze community to secede from Syria is unfortunate and is damaging Syria's potential of recovery, and also is having an impact on the regional stability. Are they safe? No. Can we make them safe and safer? The answer is yes, and that is a place for Canada to play.
International reports talking about government forces involved in the killing and the attacks on different minority groups in Syria in the last year and so. What would you tell the current government about that? If you preaching for human rights, for democracy, for protection of these minorities, what would you tell the government about why the government forces are involved in killing its own citizens?
Mr. Member, I take an exception to the comment that government forces are killing its citizens to give the impression that this is a deliberate government policy. I do not believe that this is a deliberate government policy. On the contrary, when the events took place in the Latakia region, the Syrian government sent intermediaries and tried to address the issue. And also, of course, in the Sueda region, there were attempts to reach reconciliation. What we need to do is to deal with public safety and the security of communities through the optics, as you've rightly alluded to somehow, through the optics of human rights. Amnesty International reports, Human Rights Watch, Freedom House, and other international think tanks and agencies, monitoring groups, do talk about the civil strife. And these are well documented, but I would strengthen the civil society and the inclusive community, and we need to educate and inform others.
I have constituents from the Syrian communities, from the Kurds, from the Alawite, from the Druze, and from all in Edmonton, Manning. And I met with them. They show me stories. I was listening to the killing of their people. I've seen pictures, videos that terrible about how their families being killed and tortured and displaced, and how women were raped in Syria. What can you tell the government about that?
Very, very brief response, please.
Put all the resources to prevent these killings, adopt an aggressive policy, and work on the other issues at the same time, such as transitional justice and economic development and regional cooperation. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Finally, we go to MP Stephen Guilbeault. You have 5 minutes.
Thank
you, Mr. Chair. I will turn my final minute over to my colleague, Ms. Vanderbilt.
Spoke about the role that Canada can play or should play in terms of humanitarian assistance. Can you develop on that a little bit, please?
Sorry, was that to me?
Yes, it was.
Forgive me, with the translation, I missed the first part of what you said. If you could just repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, of course. You initially spoke about, you said that Canada had an important role to play in humanitarian assistance. Could you elaborate in terms of what you feel that role could be for Canada, more specifically?
Sure. I mean, look, Canada has done great work to recalibrate its sanction framework, making it more, taking a more targeted approach. What we need to do is we need to ensure that these changes have been communicated to the financial organizations, to people within our supply chain. This will help organizations like Islamic Relief to work with agility, will allow us to get aid to those most in need quicker. Of course, we've already mentioned funding, and funding is, of course, needed. When we're looking at the numbers, we consider the destruction. I think one of my, I think it was Dr. Anas mentioned that the destruction in Syria is greater in terms of numbers, in terms of area, than Gaza, We've never seen anything like Gaza. When you consider the huge, enormous need, we need governments to come forward and to support through fund our long-term rehabilitation, sustainable development programs. And Canada has always been a respected humanitarian leader, and really it's going to take someone like Canada to show that leadership on a global scale, to inspire others to come forward and to support the needs on the ground in Syria. That for me is I think those are the things that come to mind.
Thank you. And could you help us understand or perhaps guide us in terms of support for early recovery and resilience while maintaining a clear distinction from reconstruction efforts?
So look, healthcare is of course importantly we've already Dr. Anas has mentioned mental health, which is urgently needed. Livelihood programs, allowing people to come back and to start some semblance of a livelihood to be able to stand on their own feet with dignity is important. Shelter. Many people are still living in tents because hundreds of thousands of homes have been destroyed. So these are the real urgent, immediate needs that we need to implement to help the Syrians to be able to stand on their own feet with dignity. And one thing I will say about the Syrians, they are a very proud people, and they don't want to live on handouts. They want to be able to live on, to get out of this difficulty with dignity. And of course, it's not considering the huge need. They're not going to be able to do that without international assistance.
Mr. Chair? Yep. Mr. Al-Qasim, how can we strengthen Canada's coordination effort with like-minded countries in terms of humanitarian help, but more specifically in the medical sector, to ensure efficiency and maximize benefit, and perhaps to ensure that there are no gaps?
Excellent question. Thank you so much. So I think we have some established healthcare organizations that have expertise in working in war zone and post-conflict as well. And reaching to these organizations, not necessarily we have to work with the government directly, but we want to benefit the people of Syria. Yes, there have been, as Mr. Ziad said, there have been some issues with handling, uprising here or there in Sweden and there. We have to admit that. But at the same time, we need to target the people of Syria, the vulnerable women, the children of Syria. We have the ability to reach out to these, credible organizations, working through them until we feel very comfortable to work directly with the new Syrian government.
Mr. Chair, I think there's a little bit of time. Yes. Thank you. I think there's been some discussion amongst members, so I do hope there's unanimous consent talk about having Minister Anand come to talk about the estimates. So I believe there is a motion in both official languages. It's being distributed. I will just read the motion now. It is that the committee agrees to a one-meeting study of the main estimates and invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, and relevant officials from Global Affairs Canada.
Thank you for presenting the motion. Do colleagues support the motion? Yep. Yes, there's agreement on the motion, so carried. Our next meeting, thank you to, of course, our guests for your appearance and your statements and answering all the questions. Our next meeting will be this Thursday. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? So adjourned.